Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Historical Humans podcast. My name's Justin Woods, and I'm joined today by my fellow co-hosts, Coleman and Aaron Gilpin. And today we are heading to the southernmost point in Africa, a point that has irrevocably been changed due to British counterparts. I know we like to riff on the British, but this one I think is justified, because we're going to be talking about the Boer Wars.
It's almost always justified, but we will
It's so
be
much fun.
we will be going into the colonial history of what is now the nation of South Africa. Uh, Mainly how it became the nation of South Africa. Uh, it's uh, it's a series of wars known as the Boer Wars. The Boers were what is also known as the Afrikaners. They were the Dutch colonists that lived in South Africa. And there's nothing like conquering a people and then naming a war after them as if to blame them for your own invasion.
Yeah, naturally.
Yeah, that's some what is it? 19th century
Logic.
logic, or at least skills, or well,
It- it- I believe,
concepts were used in the 21st century, unfortunately.
I believe
Because
it's
of this
called
war.
late Victorian imperialism.
Yeah.
Hey, I know that imperialism word. That's one of the causes of World War One. Mania. It's the eye.
Yep.
Well, that's a
So,
callback.
so the Boer Wars are in fact two wars. The first is known as the Transvaal War of Independence, which was fought between 1880 and 1881. And the second is known as the South African War, which was fought between 1899 and 1902. Both wars were fought over who would control South Africa, the British or the Dutch. It is an inherently uneven fight.
Seems like, yeah, that's a lot of. They said like what, 500,000, right?
I think that
Yeah,
was the second war, no?
yeah,
Oh, that's like,
that's that.
either
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. The British deploy over 500,000 troops to win some of these wars. It's it's pretty vicious. But prior to the onset of these wars, what we know today as South Africa was in fact four separate colonies. Uh, the first two were known as Cape Colony and Natal. These are British colonies. Cape Colony is the largest, it is the most prosperous, and it is the one that sort of sees itself as the rightful ruler of all the South African colonies.
So is this Cape Town?
Yeah, this would be, I believe this would be based out of Cape.
It makes
I don't
sense.
know.
It makes sense.
It's Cape Colony. Yeah. Like Cape Colony alone controls about half of the territory that is South Africa. So, the other three, have to combine to make that up.
Well, and I also think Johannesburg, is Dutch controlled at this point.
Yes, I believe it is. There were some maps that I was looking at when I was writing up some of this stuff. I don't remember them now, but yeah, Johannesburg would be a Dutch city.
Yeah.
The Dutch colonies, we should mention the other two, are known as the Orange Free State and Transvaal. Um, the British did not like the fact that the Orange Free State and Transvaal were not British colonies. Um,
I do think
it,
it's an important point to highlight real quick. Sorry to jump in
yeah,
here,
yeah,
but
no, keep going. Yeah,
the British East Indies companies and the Dutch East Indies companies had literally been two companies at war in southeastern Asia, to the point where those sentiments ran very deep both in England and in the Netherlands, to the point where this manifested a lot of times externally. And this is why imperialism becomes such a problematic thing, especially for all these countries that had vast colonial holdings, is because a lot of times those sentiments may not have been a direct war, but involved a lot of proxy wars over colonies.
Yeah. And that's what we see happening here, and that's what we see happening with most of the history of the Dutch and British East India companies. They are these two nations are not friends, and so Cape Colony starts looking for ways it can sort of gobble up the other colonies, or at least put them under the British flag. The way to do this, it decides, is Transvaal, because if Cape Colony eats Transvaal, it will completely encapsulate the Orange Free State, forcing it to be effectively blockaded by Cape Colony, with no way to get inland or to the ocean.
So they're essentially just going to try to starve it out trade-wise.
Yeah, that is the general plan that kicks off the first Boer War in 1880. Cape Colony and Natal both gang up on Transvaal to do this. However, Transvaal does not even though Transvaal fights alone, they receive heavy support from the Orange Free State in terms of safe havens, supplies, the things you would need to fight a war. The Orange Free State doesn't actually get involved in the war, but they kind of do the whole, lend-lease act kind of deal of, I will give you weapons at cost, because if you go down, I'm screwed. So there's a lot of that going on. The pretext for this war is that England declares an annexation of Transvaal, which the Dutch and Transvaal do not really recognize. And so in order to enforce English rule in the area, naturally they have to put down this silly little government.
Oh, silly little government.
If there's one thing that the British have a lot of experience at this point, this is kind of it.
Yeah. Now, the war here is personally orchestrated by a man who I will be referring to only only by his official title, the 4th Earl of Carnarvon.
The Earl of Carnarvon.
Yeah, Carnarvon. Now, Carnarvon here, slimy fella that he is, was the Secretary of State for British South Africa from 1868 until the outbreak of the war in 1880. And his dream, yes, he has a dream.
I also have a dream.
That all the Dutch and African peoples within the territories of South Africa will bow to British rule. They will live in a world where the British flag flies over all of them unquestioned.
That sounds like a very British dream, especially in the fact that he never asked the people who live there how they would feel about that dream.
Yeah.
Why do I hear Rule Britannia in the background,
guys? No. In 1876, he begins to start fortifying his position, importing troops, and building up a massive military to wipe out the Dutch colonies.
Naturally.
In 1877, he announces the annexation of Transvaal, which is something that only he recognizes. No one else acknowledges this as a legitimate document.
I think a lot of recent sociopolitical events have taught us that, annexations and usually the creations of new breakaway states tend to not hold much validity until other nations and other polities start recognizing you. If nobody recognizes you, then it's not annexation more so than just conquest.
Well, here's the thing. Everyone recognized Transvaal. The British guy here, Carnarvon, declares that Transvaal no longer exists. Carnarvon is the only person to believe that this document is in any way legitimate.
Well, knowing the British delusional mentality, the British nation believed that the empire was expanding once more.
Yeah. Now, and it's not too hard to get the British on his side here. Transvaal in 1877 is currently suffering from two major failures. The first is bankruptcy. The government has had to declare bankruptcy. It's broke. It has gone broke fighting a war against an African tribe known as the Petty. It does not really lose this war, but it costs them everything to fight it.
What did it cost?
So
Everything.
Carnarvon thinks he's looking at a economically starved, war-weary state with an unpopular government, ripe for the taking. Thing is, as much as the Dutch hate what happened with the Petty War, they hate the British more.
Understandable.
Completely understandable. I also would feel that way about the British.
Yeah. So much so that Transvaal openly protests the annexation, but the British officials in London refuse to hear their petitions.
Naturally.
Yeah.
We did
Too
nothing
easy.
wrong. We can't hear
Yeah.
anything wrong.
Guys,
Yeah.
if we don't acknowledge it, it never happened. Just like the Irish famine. You hear British Parliament say,
Yeah. The soldier song just starts playing.
"Why do I hear black and tans in the background,
You know,
guys?"
for whatever reason, I hear a group of Canadians entering a trench in World War II.
Yeah. Anyway. And
World War One.
for the most part, the British are able to get de facto control of Transvaal. However, this is where things go wrong for them. Because they place in charge of Transvaal a man by what has to be the most Hellenophile English name I have ever heard, Sir Theophilus Shepstone.
Oh no.
This man should not have been put in charge of Transvaal. Because within 2 years of the annexation, he starts the Anglo-Zulu War in 1879. This is the war that features the famous Battle of Rokes Drift, wherein a few hundred British have to hold off 10,000 angry Zulu tribesmen inside a single building.
Oh no.
Jesus.
This war kicks off with a massacre of 5,000 British soldiers.
Oh.
So, and is a humiliating defeat for the British forces. This war humiliates England. It makes the English look weak. They lost to a bunch of angry tribesmen with spears. Now
To be
those
fair,
tribesmen
the
have
Zulus
guns
were very
and are invading. Right?
It also should be highlighted that around this point in time was a huge turning point in the British Empire compared to its previous centuries worth of holdings. It genuinely, as Americans, I know we focus a lot on it, but it started with the fall of the American colonies in 1776, and then progressively, over the subsequent 100 years leading up to the Boer Wars, England lost control, Canada got its independence, Australia and New Zealand began their own independent situation. Britain lost a lot of its holdings under Queen Victoria.
Yeah, and this war just underscores the fact that the British idea that they can push wherever they want or that they can, in fact, hold and protect everything they have is a lie. And that's largely due to British tactics being horribly outdated in 1879.
Well, they hadn't adjusted in over a century. They still fought the same war. The way they started this war was the exact same way they started the American Revolution, the same way they fought Napoleon.
Yeah. It's gonna get worse.
It's like you'd think, maybe we did something wrong. No.
Do you think we are the baddies?
You're always the baddies, Britain. You know this. Yeah.
Hans, are we the baddies?
Yes, exactly.
So, sensing their chance, the Boers declare that Transvaal has been restored in December 13th, 1880. They basically announced that their government is back, the annexation is invalid, it's over, it's done. We exist again. And the British really don't learn from the Anglo-Zulu crisis they just dealt with, and instead decide to underestimate the Boers, uh,
Again, naturally.
who, who, to their credit, refused to invade Cape Colony and instead besiege all of the British garrisons in Transvaal so that none of them can get out of their base and reinforce each other and form a massive army that could crush the Boer rebellion.
Wow, so you mean like army tactics circa 5000 BCE taking place here of encirclement?
Yeah, yeah. And basically, what they do is this war has 11 key points of engagement, 7 sieges, and 4 battles. And what's important to know is we're not going to go into all of them in particular because they're all fought more or less the same way. But how it works is the Boers refuse to wear military uniforms, besiege a key position, wait for news of a relief army coming to save that key position, hide in the hills, and then massacre them once they enter any valley.
It works. It just works.
It goes so badly for the British that they are driven to full retreat during the first 2 battles of this war. Now, the British Empire prides itself on having the bugle that will never sound retreat. They might withdraw, but they never run. They run.
Well, I also think to an extent that the military tactics and this attack also just kind of took them by surprise. I mean, the British maintained a lot of garrisons across their holdings, pretty much anywhere they were, but their garrisons were maybe a couple thousand people at best, if not a couple hundred.
Yeah, yeah, and the key thing with the Boer tactics is that they need that in order to establish order here, the British had to build a ton of garrisons because they're living in hostile country with, an entire population that doesn't want them there.
Well,
So there's hundreds of small garrisons, all of which can't get out and form that massive British army that would effectively just steamroll the Boers no matter what they do.
there's a really funny sketch comedy group from the mid 2000s called The Whitest Kids You Know. And they have a sketch about the British military that I think truly encapsulates this in a nutshell, where it is the British versus the Americans, and the British are like, all right, chaps, it is our turn for the first volley. And as they get ready to shoot, the Americans just fire, and they go, no, 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 you're entirely out of your own turn. It is our turn. And since you took your turn, we get 2 turns. And they get ready to fire, and the Americans just fire again. And it's just
like, ref. It's
That
like,
is-
Papa,
yeah,
Papa, the Americans are not playing fair.
Yeah.
I imagine the same is
They're-
done here.
Warfare is a turn-based RPG for the British.
Seriously, and they just use their massive numbers and their tactics to outmaneuver people, when in reality, it's for the British, it's just a war of attrition.
Yeah,
Especially
and
when the colonists are the ones in the army,
Yeah.
killing the bodies.
Yeah, and the thing is, like the Boers know this, so they just resolve that they're going to force the British to fight in smaller numbers, because the British strength is the fact that they can amass a single army of 500,000 people, at which point you will not be able to stop them. So if they can prevent that army from forming, they can win. And here's the thing. British morale goes so poorly during this single year war that most of the forts and garrisons start surrendering to the Boers. They give up their guns and ammunition and just surrender. Because their main armies are being annihilated trying to save them. There's no point in holding out. You're literally your only purpose sitting in this fort is to lure your fellow soldiers to their death. So they start giving up, and the British respond by pulling back and trying to make as hard of a line as they can. They pull back to Pretoria, which is which would have been the capital of Transvaal, would have been the capital district. In response, the Boers simply, like they do with Cape Colony, they refused to enter it, and instead proceed to just systematically annihilate any British regiment caught in the territory they can control. They just don't take the bait. They like, yeah, no, we can't beat you if you have a fully entrenched position with a fully prepared army. So we're going to go around and hit everything that's not that.
It's effective, and it's something that a lot of military tacticians are train themselves on now, but truly had a lot of issues, is this idea of guerrilla warfare. Non-traditional warfare, taking these massive trained militaries and throwing them on their heads because, you learn to fight proper military tactics against other trained armies, especially when you're going up against Napoleon, of all people.
Yeah. And the simple thing that the British don't realize in this war, or even in the next one, is that just because you are there does not mean your enemy has an obligation to fight you there.
Yeah, right.
It's like, why? Because they'd all die if they fought you here. They know that. They're not stupid.
There's like, come down here and fight us, cowards. Why don't you come up here?
Yeah. Yep.
I don't think I will. Sorry, chap.
Yep. And by August 8th of 1881, the war ends. The Boer government is restored in Pretoria. Transvaal has achieved its independence from its 3-year-long pseudo-annexation. That ends the first Boer War. It is a resounding success for the Boers. It humiliates Britain, especially since it was effectively one Dutch colony beating the heck out of 2 British colonies.
Well, we know the British take defeat in stride and don't come back with a vengeance and don't try to exact revenge in horrific ways.
Yeah. The best part is I think Transvaal is the smallest of the colonies in South Africa, so it's literally getting beaten up by a second grader.
But we talk about how small the colonies are, but they are Dutch colonies too.
Yeah, no, but Britain had access to more land, more people, more troops, more financial support, a better network to stabilize itself in the event something went wrong, and they still lost this war.
It's a good old story of David versus Goliath.
Yeah.
Except if Goliath was the British military complex.
And so the Boers get peace for 18 years. Because in 1899, the Second Boer War breaks out. This one lasts a little longer. Goes away in 1902. And this time, it's not a war between colonies. It is the British Empire versus the Orange Free State and Transvaal. This time, England says enough is enough. You will face all of us since you're so good at beating up one of us.
Oh no.
The entirety of the British army.
Yeah, the British had one member get beaten up like a young cousin who went back home and was like, "Mummy, Poppy, I got beaten up in the African colony." And they go, "Oh no." They go, "Yeah, they killed thousands of men." And the family's like, "All right, let's call in all the cousins."
Yeah, that's how it works. And this war, the Second Boer War, is the most costly British war of the 19th century. It costs the British spend £200 million and deploy 500,000 soldiers for the sole purpose of conquering these 2 Dutch colonies. And that's £20 million unadjusted, by the way.
Which I'm trying to figure that out now.
Yeah. Good luck with that. They did all of this to defeat a Boer force of less than 1/5 their size, as the Boers had a maximum troop count of 88,000.
So, for reference, £200 million in 1899, adjusted for inflation, is roughly equivalent to £32 billion.
Yeah.
the British Army emptied their coffers for this war.
Yeah.
Just like they did the American War.
They literally just opened a fire on the ship and just shoveled pounds into it.
Uh, given how the war goes in 1901, they may as well have been doing that.
Oh no!
Given some of their tactics, they invest heavily in defensive fortifications that do not work, and it is hilarious. But this war starts off because of Britain's greed and lust for power. See, during the 18 years of peace, Transvaal had become home to the biggest gold mine in the world,
Oh,
effectively allowing it to replace Cape Colony as the dominant power of the South African colonies.
So gold, diamonds, emeralds. It's almost as if there's an economic interest based on the locations that they are fighting over.
Ah, what would they need gold for, you know?
You see, here's the fun thing. The British Empire, with its trades, is hugely dependent on gold in order to pay for things and to keep up standards and balances of trade. The British are in a trade deficit to China over opium.
Oh,
They
right.
can't get enough porcelain and tea, and they can't sell opium fast enough to make up for their losses.
I forgot this is also going on at the same time that is.
Like,
Jesus.
they have, the British have converted half of India into an opium farm, and they're still going bankrupt.
God.
Do you know how hard it is to go bankrupt as like the world's premier drug dealer? You have to be trying.
That's like if Escobar just went broke or like went into massive debt.
That's how bad the British are at managing their money right now. So they need fresh influx of gold, which at this time is literally solid money. The other key issues with this gold dependency is that Transvaal had a policy that said Uitlanders, which was the Transvaal term for foreigners living in Transvaal, to own the gold mines. You could work in them, but you could not own them. And because of all this gold and wealth, Transvaal is modernizing. They're replacing Cape Colony. And Britain really doesn't like this. They still think they're entitled to Transvaal because of the annexation of 1877. So they claim that even if they don't have direct annexed rule, they have the right to suzerainty of Transvaal, meaning that they have the right to dictate Transvaal's internal and external policies, sort of like a puppet state. That Transvaal should only exist to serve the whims of the British government. Well, Transvaal takes issue with this.
No. The British have a point. They have a vested economic interest in Cape Colony. They cannot let another sister colony to that outperform.
Yeah. So, in 1897, the British do the only rational thing. They demand that all British people living in Transvaal, all British Uitlanders, be given full rights, and, that the gold mines be turned over to England.
Naturally.
Yeah.
You know that thing that's making you hyper-prosperous and wealthy.
And they don't outright state that second point. However, the purpose of giving the British Uitlanders full rights would be so that the British government could use them to buy out the gold mines. That's Britain's plan, is to effectively bribe or muscle once the British citizens can legally do so, to, muscle out anyone who isn't British and runs a gold mine.
Yeah, that makes sense, though.
Now, what's interesting with Transvaal is most gold mines at this time can be run as single person operations. The gold in Transvaal is deep underground. It requires complex industrial machinery to work. It is only because of like national level funding that any gold is able to be extracted. So Transvaal is naturally very protective of its gold. And the British can't just come in there, mine a few rocks, and run across the border. which really screws with Britain for the longest time. But yeah, and so in 1899, what's known as the Bloemfontein Conference is held. This is where the Orange Free State tries to negotiate a peaceable settlement between Britain and Transvaal. And Transvaal agrees to make some concessions. They agree to lighten restrictions on the British Uitlanders, but they won't outright just give up the goat. They won't just outright do it. So Britain deems that these concessions are not enough, and then proceeds to deploy a massive army to South Africa and have it sit on the border of Transvaal, with the natural implied threat that all gunboat diplomacy brings: do as I say, or I murder everyone you love.
From the safety of my gunboat in the harbor.
Yep. Transvaal then offers Britain even more concessions, but Britain has already committed to violence at this point, so they refuse.
That's yeah, that makes sense.
At which point, Transvaal sees the writing on the wall and issues an ultimatum to England: withdraw or perish. And they order that Britain remove all the troops from the Transvaal Cape Colony border, or they will invade Cape Colony. Britain laughs, and they decide to call Transvaal's bluff. And to the surprise of no one who isn't English, on October 11th, 1899, the army of Transvaal sweeps over the British line into Cape Colony.
Jeez.
The British are caught completely by surprise. They literally told the British what day they were invading, and the British still weren't prepared for it. Oh yeah, it's bad. It's bad. Now, the British policy was that Transvaal is a small nation. It's a small colony. Even if it is rich, it won't risk losing everything overnight by invading. And if they do, they're Dutch. We can beat them easily. They're just the Dutch.
They're just the Dutch. Didn't they also end up kicking their ass at in the English Channel at one point?
This is the English army. It learns nothing.
No, they don't, because ego, money, and just influence. It's the British's own concoction.
This is pre-industrialized warfare for them. The promotion system is based off is hereditary.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Your father's a baron. You're a colonel. You're 19 years old, but you're a colonel.
Not to mention, your father is the 3rd Baron of Elderberry and went to the Royal Army Academy, where you have also graduated. So congratulations. You are now a lieutenant at 17.
Yep.
To be fair, though, they also had more military training than most of the army, but...
Yep. But still. What's fun about this is that the Boers invade the British colony of Natal from Transvaal, and they invade Cape Colony by marching through the Orange Free State.
The epitome of not my...
Because the Orange Free State is on their side. They know what happens if Transvaal loses, so they just throw their lot in with them.
God, that is the epitome of not my battle, not my fight. You watch the fights that go viral on the internet of people just looking away or continuing about their business. That's the Orange Free State.
God,
it gets even better.
Oh,
British
no.
rule, being British, is so unpopular that the northern territories of Cape Colony rebel against England and join the invading Boers to march on Cape Town.
Damn, you really fucked up when you when your own colony say, yeah, no.
Again, don't say that about the British, because almost all of their colonies rebel at some point.
Yeah. Now, the key to this is Northern Cape Colony, which means it's the inland part. So the primary demographic here is not British. It is African, and it is Boer and British. But the British make a small minority out of that, which means that the other two demographics both hate England.
So it's still like modern day Cape Town, where the white South Africans, the British derived or the Afrikaans derived, live in the beautiful part of town, the safe parts, the ones where...
Yeah. Basically, this is where all the non-English people living in the English colony are living. So they all just rebel.
Most places would call that the natives.
Well, it's also the Dutch. It's the Dutch and the Africans that are living in Cape Colony live in this region.
Jeez, yeah.
Yeah. They're surprisingly enough, Transvaal and like Cape Colony have like open borders for like the entirety of their history, despite hating each other.
Well, yeah, because it's the people up top that hate each other, whereas reality, the people on the ground are like, that's my cousin. That's
Yeah. So it's like they there's people on both sides of the line here. It's just everyone rebels. And initially, the Boers are just winning. They win field victories. They besiege key British positions. It's effectively a repeat of the first Boer War. During the Black Week, December 10th to 15th of 1899, the Boers win 3 major engagements in 5 days. They conquer the British at Magersfontein, Colesberg, and Stormberg. They just ambush and annihilate any British force that comes out to face them, and besiege any force that doesn't. Because once again, the British have divided their forces to form a picket line.
Well, and the thing I get a kick out of with this is, not much really changed from the first Boer War to the second in terms of tactics and the way they approach it. And part of that is the British not learning and the Boers realizing just how effective it is against the British.
Yeah. So in response, the British perform what I like to call a reverse sea turtle hatching, where they just start sending overwhelming forces out of the ocean into Cape Colony.
It's crazy how much we see them do that.
Yeah. They just start importing soldiers. In 1900, at the start of the year, they land most of their army. Most of the 500,000 shows up.
Wow.
Under the command of 2 men, Kitchener and Roberts.
Lord Kitchener?
Roberts is not important. Lord Kitchener, however, is, for what we're going to talk about. This is because Kitchener is one of those few people in history where you can say, did he do anything that wasn't a war crime?
Oh, boy.
Is it a war crime? Is it not a war crime? The Geneva Conventions didn't exist at this time.
Yeah.
But, Your Honor, how could it be a war crime if we won?
Kitchener's tactics are so brutal that it sparks anti-war protests in London.
Wow.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Wow.
He's that terrible of a human being. He's that terrible. And we get to talk about him for like the next half of this podcast, because most of what happens is his fault.
Clearly.
So, step 1 for Kitchener is logistics. He takes control of the railways, and he uses them to effectively do steampunk blitzkrieg, where he just ships massive amount of soldiers around the country as fast as the trains can carry them to just drop overwhelming force on the doorstep of the Boers. And because of this, he's able to break some sieges. He's able to secure most of the urban areas for England. There's just one problem. Like 80% of the country is rural or wilderness. And the Boers still control all of that. Yeah. Yeah. So despite the fact that he has these successes, he's able to relieve the British positions like they weren't able to do in the first Boer War. He's able to start turning the tide, he stops the bleeding. The Boers just keep attacking because he can't pin down the main Boer force. They look like civilians. They hide in the bush. And they attack whenever we're not looking.
Again, I know I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but it is amazing how effective warfare like this is. And the funny thing to me is, I know we haven't quite classified this as guerrilla warfare yet, and I know that's upcoming, but this is still this is guerrilla warfare 101. This is like pre...
Yeah, the key distinction here is the Boers are still like openly meeting the British in battle. Like they will step out of the trees, form a line, and just shoot down into them and then run away. Like they're still doing that. The guerrilla warfare is when things escalate.
Oh no. Oh no.
Escalate how?
Yep. Well, over the course of 6 months, starting in February, what's his name here? Kitchener captures 3 key positions. In February, he takes Bloemfontein, which is the capital of the Orange Free State. He takes Johannesburg, the most important non-capital city, in May. He takes Pretoria, the capital of Transvaal, in June. And in so doing, he forces Paul Kruger, the president of Transvaal, to flee to Europe. Which, by the way, fun fact, the Dutch colonies were democracies.
Of course.
Well, yeah.
Which the British despise.
Yeah. Oh, God. The British to democracy is penicillin to most modern medicine. Yeah. They just destroyed the disease.
Yeah.
The disease of democracy.
Yeah. Paul Kruger does a lot of things to really try and garner support for the Boer cause in Europe. And even though he is unable to secure any meaningful assistance, no supplies, no weapons, no soldiers, he does successfully turn most of Europe against England. Which is not that hard.
I was going to say, it's not that hard, especially around this time where a lot of European unity is happening. This is the first true sense of European identity, because everyone after Napoleon and his ancestors died out were like, hey, we're all cousins and friends.
Yeah, and
we're all cousins here.
Yeah.
Kruger plays up that concept of this isn't some foreign invasion or some distant war. This is the British becoming the next Napoleon. This is the British asserting their right to rule over other European nations.
But then nobody wanted
that is a line that the European nations feel that no one should cross, because the last time someone crossed it was Napoleon.
But then they still refuse to do anything about it. They still go, hey, we don't agree with this, but you're kind of scary. And I don't disagree with them, because the British were fighting a war on literally the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
And fighting one in your backyard is a little different when London is only a short boat trip away.
Yeah, and the real issue, too, is that Transvaal and the Dutch don't have anything to really offer the other European powers for assistance. Yes, it has that prosperous gold mine, but Transvaal's fighting a defensive war. It's going to be rebuilding. Transvaal doesn't have the massive economic connections. Transvaal can't protect your vessels when they go out to sea. Transvaal can't help you when you need help. You would be propping them up for the sake of spiting the British and get nothing else out of it. So they don't have an incentive beyond morality to do anything. So, like any nation, they don't do anything.
Poor bastards.
Yeah.
It just we make jokes and we make light of this, but in reality, this is truly one of the darkest periods I think in British history. Beyond, and I know that
All
says
the
a
other
lot.
periods of British history.
Yeah, I know there's a lot, and rightfully so. They deserve the shit talking. I promise, like, despite the strong anti-British sentiments on this podcast and on our videos, we do actually really like England and Britain and the United Kingdom as a whole. It's just, this is really fucking dark.
Yeah. We are primarily, like, anti-imperialist, anti-authoritarian, anti-colonial for the most part. So Britain and Spain and sometimes the good old US of A really start getting flack because they tended to do this more than anyone else.
Yeah.
And
they're not the only guilty parties. They're just the most visible.
God, and the Americans, they did it longer than anyone else because they're like, well, of course we'll stop. As they're marching along.
Yeah. Now the Boers shift into full guerrilla warfare here under two men who have some of the funnest names I think I've had to say on this show. We have Christian Rudolph de Wet and Jacobus Hercules de la Rey.
Beautiful names. Truly men of stature.
These two men hold off the British for 15 months.
Wow.
Without any government to support them. Because Paul Kruger is in Europe. He has had to flee. The government of Transvaal is a government in exile.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So, naturally, what he does to make this true guerrilla warfare is these two men stop targeting the British armies. They've broken sieges. They're able to form a large single army. Instead, he starts attacking their communications, their supplies, their rail lines. He just starts sabotaging anything he can get his hands on.
I mean, when you're looking at this war and the logistics side of things, because I'm going to speak to a lot of grunts' hearts here, and logistics win war. Let's call it what it is. Logistics wins wars. And what the Boers were doing is they were strategic on their attacks. They were going after supply lines. They were going after communication networks. Like, they were toppling the house as the foundations were being laid. It's kind of a great strategy because if you allow them to get that kind of foothold, that kind of stranglehold over those networks, it's game over right from the get-go. But if you can keep them second guessing, if you can keep them on their toes, if you can keep these small incursions, you're going to cause a lot more stress.
And the British supply lines were massive. In order to get to Transvaal, you had to get on a ship from somewhere else in the British Empire, sail to Cape Colony. From there, you had to go hundreds of miles inland to the border of Transvaal, and then probably another good 100 miles more to cross it. So there is a massive open network just within Cape Colony for the sake of attacking. And these two men, they target it, and they are brutally effective. Kitchener responds to this by deploying barbed wire and blockhouses along the railways. Now, what a blockhouse is if you were to make a little square building and put a bunch of gun turrets on it, that is a blockhouse. It's about 2 stories tall. It looks like a little tower fort. It's a cube standing on a pole. The Boers do what they did in the first Boer War. They ignore fortified British positions. They ignore hard lines of defense. They control the entire countryside. You might be able to put one of these blockhouses every 10, 20 miles. So they'll get right between two of them, wait for the train to come by, and topple it. And you can't stop them.
Because the alternate there, and this is where the British really hit their rope's end, so to speak, is at what interval do you stop trying to build some? Because you have them a couple miles apart, you plop one right down in the middle. They just keep bisecting that. They just keep going in between them.
At a certain point, you're just building a massive manned wall along the entire railway, which Kitchener realizes he can't do. He realizes he's burning money. I mean, he's got 32 billion pounds worth of modern British currency to wage this war, and he is burning through it. So he instead decides that if reasonable measures can't win this war, unreasonable means must be taken. And he goes to scorched earth. Anything not owned by a British person is destroyed. He burns every farm that belongs to either a Boer or an African. He gathers up the entire population of Transvaal and puts them into concentration camps, which he then proceeds to neglect.
This is definitely where it takes a darker turn, and we knew this was coming. That's why I tried to keep it light, but they created a really, really effective slaughterhouse. And even though it was a concentration camp, so to speak, where they were just housed, it killed thousands because it was just inhumane conditions, not proper sanitation. They were hardly given any sort of food or medical attention that was needed. Not to mention, when you put so many people in such a small area, that this was truly one of the cruelest acts done in this time period.
Now, the primary demographic for the death toll in these camps is children. It is women and children. He effectively decides that if he can't win the war today, he will eliminate the next generation of Boers so that there can be none who come after.
Yeah, that's just genocide. That's just straight up genocide.
Yeah. Except he sidesteps this by saying, I'm not killing them. I'm just leaving them to die. Things get so bad that there is international outcry at the conditions. These conditions are exposed by a woman named Emily Hobhouse. Now, Hobhouse here was an English social worker. She was working in the United States of America when I believe a friend told her the rumors of these horrors that were going on during this war in South Africa, and she decided that she was going to investigate. The Boers nickname her the Angel of Love for what she does when she finds out what happens. Which is basically make every paper that she can find in England, America, Europe, start printing stories of the atrocities that she witnesses verbatim.
God.
She engages a massive information warfare, and in response, she is forcibly deported from South Africa in 1901.
Again, I want to highlight the fact that this is the 19th century at this point. This is the tail end of the Gilded Age. Like, the Enlightenment has gone through. Enlightenment has happened. People are starting to become more cognizant about conditions of others. People are starting to be more empathetic. The fact that the British are continuing this in 1901.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it doesn't sound very enlightened to me.
Yeah, she is forcibly deported. However, conditions are improved as a result of her efforts. And I say improved because the only source I could find on what improvements were done was Kitchener saying, I promise, pretty promise, please, that I have done something about this. Believe me.
For fuck's sakes.
I could not find anything detailing what changed between Hobhouse's arrival and Hobhouse's exile, other than the world finding out that Kitchener here was trying to kill everyone.
I guarantee you, I guarantee you, I can just imagine if the internet was around then, Kitchener would be somebody who'd be like, I guess it's too woke to just kill people now.
Yeah, literally, like, cancel culture will no longer let us do this.
Yeah.
Goddamn cancel culture won't let us commit a genocide.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awful.
The Boers, for their part, managed to strike at Cape Colony. They get about 50 miles, 80 kilometers from Cape Town, the British capital of South Africa, and they just disrupt everything. They hit everything in a what is unfortunately an act of desperation. They have been worn down by the atrocities. They are witnessing constant atrocities. These are their families. Their families are dying, and everywhere there is a promise of if you just stop fighting the British, we won't kill everyone you love.
Oh,
And
that's it.
every day the Boers keep fighting, there's a chance that everyone they love will be brutally murdered.
That just sounds like stop resisting arrest.
Stop
Yeah.
resisting colonization.
Yeah.
Is
And
what it really is.
Kitchener's brutality does wear down the Boers. The Boer camp splits between Bitterenders and Hopstoppers, which are the people who want to fight to the bitter end and the people who are willing to put their hands up and surrender. Um, Eventually, the Hopstoppers win out. There's a peace offer put forward in March of 1901. The British peace offer basically states that Transvaal will recognize British authority. Transvaal will cease to exist. Transvaal will be annexed under the British Crown. And in return, at the local level, you will be allowed to govern yourselves. This offer is rejected. However, another year of warfare brings about the Peace of Vereeniging in May of 1902, in which point the Boers decide that it is better to live on your knees than be exterminated. The Boers accept British annexation. They accept the suzerainty of Britain and Cape Colony and all of that good stuff that the British wanted. In return, they were granted local self-government, and they are allowed to once again work and run the gold mines under the new British rules. This peace also forged an alliance against the Africans, as the Boers had come to realize, as had the British, that if this war goes on much longer, the white minority in South Africa will no longer be of sufficient strength to suppress all the African tribes that are currently in South Africa.
Of course, that's what they're concerned
Yeah,
about.
no, the fact that they come together after the war to just say, "Hey, we're white."
Yeah. In fact, this is made apparent by the rebellion of Swaziland. Black Africans retake Swaziland and negotiate their own settlement with the British, separate from South Africa. And that is why Swaziland is not a part of South Africa.
Oh, so that's how that happened.
Yeah. And the Boers and British both realize, oh no, the people who are actually supposed to live here might take back the country if we keep killing each other. Also, the Boers are starting to run out of people. So yeah, it's absolutely despicable why this war ends and how it ends, because it's genocide, which is only stopped for the sake of racism.
Yay, racism.
Who said it's such a divisive topic when it brings people together?
Yeah.
For legal purposes, that is a joke. That is not serious.
That is yeah. You can tell by the southern accent.
Yes. Anytime something is said with an accent, I'm not being serious. But
Yeah.
it truly is an atrocious thing, because almost 100,000 people died in total. 20,000 soldiers from the British side, 14,000 Boer troops, and then a further 50,000 civilians. And the only way it ended was they ended up basically coming together to disenfranchise the majority black community to ensure a minority white rule because of the wealth.
Yeah. And fun fact, the civilian casualty count, those are the minimum numbers. That is the fewest number of bodies they could have killed.
And the fucked up thing is, this happened in the beginning of the 19th century. It wasn't until the 1990s when apartheid ended, and the separation between the segregation, I should say, because that's just what it is. The segregation ended very, very recently. Like, we're talking about an event that happened 130 years ago, still having modern ramifications less than 30 years ago.
Yeah. Justin, to that point, the first study
Yeah,
that
1994, right?
indicated that any Africans were involved in or were killed during this war occurred in 1986.
Yeah.
What the
So
fuck?
they refused to acknowledge the systematic murder of 20,000 people for 80 years
That sounds about right.
on the basis of those people's skin tone.
You know,
Um,
it makes me
yeah.
wonder how, because like there's like the British school systems don't teach this stuff usually. Like they're just as bad as American schools not teaching about like Native American genocides.
And the thing is, it not only do they prevent that side of things, but the war had long term standing effects. Like I mentioned, mania, which is the cause of World War I, which includes militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism,
Yeah.
and oh god,
And the simple fact that like Kruger running around trying to get support to save his people really made Britain look like the bad guy, alongside what Kitchener was doing. Like Britain gets kind of isolated from some of the mainland German states that, like, the Dutch a little bit more, like Germany and Austria-Hungary, suddenly don't trust England not to be, interfering or problematic.
which also on the same token of that, given the time period, most of Africa and the Middle East at this time was subdivided against European nations. So if England is having this unrelenting war against another neighboring colony of a European nation, God knows what they're going to do in, the Middle East, in the Holy
Yeah.
Land, in any number of their colonial holdings. It's not a unique thing for it to be like it.
Yeah.
The possibility of it
Yeah.
being an isolated event is less than likely.
Yeah, today they took out the Dutch colonies. Tomorrow they might take out the Belgian. Next, who knows? Maybe they'll target the French
Wait,
or the
you heard it
German
here
or
first.
the
The
Italian.
English are going for the Congo.
Not
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Belgian Congo. I will never let you talk me into covering that. If you all thought this was dark, Belgian Congo, ladies and gentlemen.
hey, I got you to even mention it, so the
Yeah.
seed has been
I-
planted.
No, no, it will not be claimed. Anyway, the conclusion of this war lays the foundation for the Union of South Africa in 1910, which is how we end up with the nation of South Africa today. Simple fact, the British wanted to consolidate all of this into one colony instead of managing four separate ones. The British really um, really don't get too much out of this,
Well,
other than they now have the Dutch on their side to commit apartheid.
you're forgetting the most important fact that I mentioned pre-recording.
Yeah,
That
go.
one of the main figures that ended up coming out of this war is a one Sir Winston Churchill, who was a member of the British Army at this time, conducting external affairs there, and ended up becoming a prisoner of war and
Yeah.
was considered a war hero when he returned back to England.
Yeah. So Winston Churchill during this war, he is credited with spotting a Boer ambush and saving most of his regiment despite being captured. And then he is credited with a heroic escape from captivity and imprisonment by savages, i.e., Boers, when he hops the prison fence and makes a run for it.
And this man ended up going into politics shortly thereafter. He was one of those, what did you
He
say
is
earlier? Hereditary leaders?
Yeah, hereditary promotions.
Yes, hereditary
You think they would have
promotions.
learned their lesson during the Crimean War with hereditary officers?
Look, we
Honestly,
don't talk about Crimea.
honestly, honestly, Aaron, this is Churchill we're talking about. The man might be a hero in World War II. He might be a quote unquote hero in the Boer War, but I just have to say the word Gallipoli, and we all know what he really thought and what he really was.
Yeah. Anyways, that's a nice little bow tie we can put on the Boer Wars. We thought that'd be an interesting topic and a little more modern than some of our usual shindigs. But as you can see, this, what seemed to be a smaller event in the grand scheme of things, ended up having long-term repercussions and long-term effects that bled out just beyond South Africa.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely set the stage of mistrust between the European powers prior to World War One, and it most definitely didn't give Germany and to some extent the United States any ideas on how to suppress an undesired population.
Ooh, yeah, that's a tough one.
Darkness.
Thank you guys
Yeah.
for watching. If you enjoyed, drop a like down below. Be sure to check out our other videos, and we will see you in the next video.